Hello, fellow readers and booktubers. A couple of weeks ago, a booktuber named Lekden, who can be his booktube channel can be found at Reading from the Depths, had posted a tag called The Philosophy of Reading. And what inspired him to do this, or the purpose for the tag, was in some respects a commemoration of a very special day on the Buddhist calendar. And it commemorates the date when the Buddha informed the world, or kind of enlightened the world, as to the Four Noble Truths, which are foundational to Buddhist thought. So Lekden came up with the idea of a philosophy of reading, which would just have 4 prompts, which are kind of foundational to the reading experience, or for readers. Now, of course, the way these prompts would be responded to would be different to each reader. But this is kind of interesting. I was tagged by a lot of different people, and every time I would read through the prompts, I would start thinking about how I'm going to respond. And for some of them, of course, I would end up overthinking it and even losing my focus on what I originally wanted to say. So I would have to keep stepping back or putting it aside for a while. I think the latest tag I got was from my friend Kevin at Kevin Toll Reads. And so I was listening to other people's responses and Kevin's responses to give me an idea of how to approach this. And so eventually, I was able to kind of narrow the focus a little bit. And so I'd like to share my responses to these 4 prompts now. The first prompt, and this is the big one. What is your own personal philosophy of reading? How do you think about reading? What does reading mean to you? How does your reading life affect your non-reading life? And so on. This, when you talk about philosophy, there's a lot of different approaches to this in a way. There's like the technical approach, in philosophy. And when it comes to reading, you can get into the whole thing about phenomenology and epistemology and all that business, which I only kind of understand. You could talk about reading as this really incredibly fascinating, almost a biological thing that happens to your brain, the way we can process marks on a page, turn them into letters and turn those letters into sounds and then group them into separate sounds, and now we're reading, and how all that happens in the twinkling of an eye. That's remarkable to me. And reading, is a uniquely human experience. But I think in the spirit of the way this question is asked, it's more like, why do you read? Why are you reading books? Well, what is it about reading? And I think the reason for this, or one's personal philosophy of reading, is something that changes over time. It can evolve, it can mature, and I think for most of us, we first become readers because we like reading. It's an enjoyable experience. It's fun. When we're very young, we're reading adventure stories or science fiction or fantasy stories. And for many people, that's fine. That's it. Reading for enjoyment, reading for entertainment, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. Other people, though, maybe start to branch out a little bit. I know that's what happened to me. I started, reading for enjoyment, and then layered on that was reading for knowledge, and then layered upon that was reading for maybe some hope for wisdom or insight and all of this. At the root of it, though, I read because I enjoy reading, gives me great entertainment. It's very entertaining. But how I define entertainment became different over time. It wasn't just enough to read exciting adventure stories. I wanted to read the thoughts of a great philosopher. I wanted to read the insights of an historian or a political thinker or something like that. So, my personal philosophy of reading, it has changed over time. It has become quite layered. And I don't know if I can really put it into a simple statement other than I like what it does to my head. There is this old expression, I think it goes back to the 60s, Gracie Slick and Jefferson Airplane. They might have had a song with this title, or maybe this was a line from one of their songs, and it said, feed your head. And so for me, reading is a way of feeding my head, is to keep my mind healthy and aware and alert. And I can't imagine anything more important to do with your life. So I guess that's something of a philosophy of reading. The second prompt, when did you first come to think of yourself as a reader? The response to this one is similar to the first prompt in that to think of yourself as a reader is, again, it's a layered thing. It occurs over time, or how you define yourself as a reader changes over time. I do not come from a family of readers. I just don't. I had one cousin who read all the time, And he was a couple years older than me, and I really looked up to him, and that's how I started reading because I thought it was a cool thing to do. But no one else in my family read. I, you know, I wasn't berated for reading. The rest of my family just saw that it was just part of my personality. It's just what I do. You know, he reads books and all this kind of thing. So I never thought of reading as this kind of odd experience. And by the time I got into high school, you know, I was taking a lot of literature courses and history courses, and so I'm reading more deeply. And then when I get to college, still reading, I decided to major in history. After college, I got married, family, some young children, but I went back. And I went back to graduate school, and I'm studying history. Well, at the same time, married, I had a 9-to-5 job, and I had young children. But I was younger, I had a lot more stamina. So, you know, when I would get home from work, I could play with the kids, hang out with the wife. And then when everyone went to bed, I would go downstairs, and there was a odd little room in the house that we lived in that became my study. And I would kind of cloister myself and begin reading. Because when you major in history, that's mostly what you do. You read book after book after book after book. You can barely catch your breath. That was when I began to think of myself as a reader. This was the thing that I do. Everything else I did during the day was leading up to that moment. And I would read late into the night, into the wee hours of the morning. And I began to realize that this is something that defines me, even more than being an historian. And then after all, you know, after getting my degree, I became a history teacher or a lecturer in history at the college level. But more than that, I'm a reader. This is a thing that I do. This is part of me. This is my life's blood. And today, you know, our friend and patriarch Steve Donahue often remarks that there aren't many readers anymore. I'm not sure I agree with that. If you walk into a Barnes & Noble, there are books stacked up to the ceiling. However, I think most people don't read more than a couple of books a year, if that. A reader today is kind of an endangered species. And all of you that I'm speaking to right now, we're the true readers. And I don't think there's a whole lot of us. I think maybe Steve Donahue might be correct in that people who read because that's just what they do. It's part of who they are. In the same way a singer sings, or a piano player plays piano, or a construction worker builds, you know, or a football player plays football. A reader reads. And so to identify yourself as a reader, that's something that occurs slowly over time. And for me, I began to think of myself as a reader with a capital R sometime around graduate school or a little bit after. And so I sometimes think, you know, if I had to fill out a job application or any kind of profile of some kind, and, you know, identify yourself in one word, I would just write reader, because I am a reader. But when did that happen? Again, it happened over time. It was a steady, kind of an intellectual maturity took place, and I began to realize, oh, this is what I am. The third prompt: what are some goals or hopes that you have for your reading life? A few years ago, I remember I was reading, I think it was in the New York Times. The New York Times, one of their book critics had said that at the beginning of the year, he was going to only read books written by authors who were not from like a Western background. In other words, no one who had like a European ancestry. He was only going to read books written by people whose ancestry was African or Asiatic or something like that. You know, just to kind of broaden his horizon, his understanding of the human experience, which had been mostly limited to Western European authors. Now, I don't know what happened to that. I didn't follow up on whether he was able to maintain that New Year's resolution or what the experience was like for him, but that always stuck with me. And so a kind of a goal that I haven't really set in stone yet, but it would be to set aside an entire year to do a kind of specialized reading. Not necessarily one that would embrace diversity or other cultures, but a specialized kind of reading that would focus just on one author or one philosopher or one historian. For example, I've often thought about putting aside an entire year to read nothing but Shakespeare or books about Shakespeare. Now, I've read all of Shakespeare's plays. I've read a number of them a number of times, but just to start with start at the beginning and read through the entire canon to the very end, and read all the commentaries and books about Shakespeare. To do that, to read that and nothing but that for an entire year, I think the person I would be at the end of the year would be a little different than the person I was at the beginning of the year. Or maybe, put aside a year to read nothing but ancient histories or classical works of antiquity. I've got over here the complete works of Cicero, the great Roman statesman. Now, you can read all of those in less than a year's time, but just to focus, really specialize in that one particular author or thinker from a particular time in history, I think that would be an interesting experiment. Another goal maybe would be to, in addition to your other reading throughout the year, pick a particular author or a couple of authors or poets and start memorizing certain passages from their novels or from their poems. Maybe even memorize a couple of poems from beginning to end. I think that would be a wonderful exercise. It would keep the mind sharp. So those are some of my goals. What is part of your current reading life right now that is important or exciting to you right here, right now, what I'm doing right now, being part of BookTube? Although lately, and I've mentioned this on some of my more recent posts, I am experiencing something kind of like BookTube fatigue. I know other people are mentioning this too. I don't quite know what it means. It caused me to kind of pull back for a couple of weeks, and I didn't really put up any videos at all. And now I'm getting back into it a little bit. I'm approaching it from a different angle, but it is part of the reading experience. It is part of being a reader, and it's very important and very exciting to me that I can share my thoughts and ideas with the rest of you. And I do read your comments, and I enjoy them a great deal. So that's, BookTube is part of my reading life right now that is very exciting for me, and I enjoy it immensely. So that's my philosophy of reading, more or less. Thank you for listening. I look forward to any comments you might have. I'm going to tag a whole bunch of people, although I think by now everyone I'm tagging has already been tagged with this. I apologize for that because I'm a little late to the party as usual. But thank you, Kevin. I think Pat at Book Chat with Pat, she might have tagged me too. But if she didn't, I saw her, how she responded to this. It was very informative and helpful to me and many, many others. So anyway, that's it. That's my philosophy of reading. Keep reading and stay strong.